I watched in horror as Sheriff Karen stepped out of her patrol car, sledgehammer in hand. My barn stood behind me, 40 years of sweat and dreams built into every board. She looked me straight in the eye with that cold smile I had learned to fear. "You should have opened those gates when I asked nicely," she said, raising the hammer above her head. The first blow shattered more than just wood. It shattered everything I thought I knew about justice in our small town. My name is Tom, and for 37 years I called Millfield County home. My ranch sat on 200 acres of the prettiest land you could imagine. Rolling green pastures stretched as far as the eye could see, with a creek running through the middle that never ran dry, even in drought years. Every morning, I would walk out to my barn and breathe in that sweet smell of hay and horses. The red paint was fresh, the roof solid, and the doors wide enough to drive a tractor through. I had built that barn with my own hands back in 1987, and it had weathered every storm that came our way. The people of Millfield were good folks. Every 4th of July, they would gather at my ranch for barbecue and fireworks. Kids would pet the horses while their parents sat on hay bales, sharing stories and cold beer. My property became the heart of our community, and I was proud to open my gates to anyone who needed a place to gather. Sheriff Karen Mitchell had been with the department for 12 years when I first met her. She seemed professional enough, always polite when she stopped by during our events to check that everything was running smooth. She wore her uniform with pride and spoke respectfully to everyone she met. "Nice spread you got here, Tom," she said during one summer barbecue, looking around at the families enjoying themselves. "Must be nice having all this space to yourself." I remember thinking that was an odd way to put it, but I just smiled and offered her a burger. She declined and walked back to her patrol car, but I caught her looking over her shoulder at my property one more time before she drove away. What I did not know then was that Karen had bigger plans than just keeping the peace in Millfield County. She had political ambitions that burned as hot as the July sun, and she was already calculating how my ranch might fit into her future. The warning signs were there, but I was too trusting to see them. When she asked detailed questions about my property boundaries, I thought she was just being thorough. When she commented on how much influence I had in the community, I took it as a compliment. When she mentioned how useful my ranch would be for large gatherings, I assumed she was just making conversation. Those peaceful summer evenings on my porch, watching the sun set over my pastures, were numbered. I just did not know it yet. The storm that would tear through my life was already brewing, and it wore a badge and a smile that never reached the eyes. Everything changed the day Karen announced her campaign for county commissioner. She called me on a Tuesday morning in March, her voice carrying a new edge of authority I had never heard before. "Tom, I need to discuss something important with you," she said. "Can you meet me at your place this afternoon?" When she arrived, she was not alone. Deputy Martinez followed behind her cruiser in his own patrol car, and they both parked right in front of my porch. Karen climbed out wearing her full uniform, gun belt and all, even though this was supposed to be a friendly visit. "I am running for county commissioner," she announced without any small talk, "and I need your ranch for my campaign kickoff event. This is the perfect location to show voters that I have community support." The way she said it did not sound like a request. It sounded like she was informing me of a decision that had already been made. I stood there on my own front porch, feeling like a stranger in my own home. "Well, Karen, I appreciate you thinking of my place," I said carefully, "but I have always kept politics off my property. I think it is better for the community if my ranch stays neutral ground." Her smile disappeared so fast it made my stomach drop. The friendly sheriff I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I did not recognize. Her hand moved to rest on her gun belt, a gesture that seemed automatic but felt like a threat. "That is disappointing, Tom," she said, her voice flat and cold. "I was hoping I could count on your support. After all, I have been very good to you over the years. Very accommodating." Deputy Martinez shifted uncomfortably behind her, like he was watching something he did not want to be part of. I could see in his eyes that he was just as surprised by Corinne's tone as I was. "I am not saying I do not support you," I tried to explain. "I just think it is better if I stay out of politics entirely. Keep my place open for everyone, regardless of how they vote." Corinne took a step closer, and suddenly my front porch felt very small. She looked around at my property like she was seeing it for the first time, her eyes calculating and cold. "You know, Tom, this is a lot of land for one person to manage alone," she said. "A lot of responsibility, a lot of things that could go wrong if you do not have the right kind of protection." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I realized that the woman standing on my porch was not the same person I had known for years. This was someone else entirely, someone who saw my refusal as a personal insult that needed to be punished. "I will let you think about it," she said, putting her sunglasses back on. "But I hope you will reconsider. It would be a shame if our good relationship changed over something so simple." She turned and walked back to her patrol car, but not before giving my barn one long, lingering look. Deputy Martinez followed, but he glanced back at me with something that looked like an apology in his eyes. After they drove away, I stood on my porch for a long time, watching the dust settle on my gravel drive. For the first time in 37 years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. The peaceful sanctuary I had built suddenly felt vulnerable, exposed. That night I could not sleep. Every car that passed on the county road made me sit up and look out the window. By morning, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stand my ground, no matter what Corinne thought about it. I just had no idea how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. The harassment started small, the way these things always do. 3 days after our conversation, I found a citation tucked under my windshield wiper. "Improper storage of agricultural equipment," it read, with a fine of $250 attached. I stared at the yellow paper in disbelief. The same hay baler that had sat in the same spot for 15 years was suddenly a violation. The same equipment that had never been a problem during any of Corinne's previous visits was now endangering public safety, according to her report. The phone calls started that same week. My neighbor Bill came by on Friday with a worried expression I had never seen on his face before. "Tom, I need to tell you something," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot on my porch. "Sheriff Mitchell came by yesterday asking questions about you." My blood ran cold. What kind of questions? Whether you ever had loud parties that disturbed the peace, whether I had seen any suspicious activity on your property, whether you kept your livestock properly contained. Bill shook his head. "I told her you were the best neighbor a man could ask for, but Tom." She was not asking like someone who wanted good answers. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 more neighbors called to tell me similar stories. Corinne was making rounds through the community, asking leading questions designed to paint me as a problem. She was building a case against me one conversation at a time, and most people were too intimidated by her badge to refuse to answer. The citations multiplied like weeds after rain. My fence was 6 inches too close to the property line, according to a survey that had never been required before. My burn pile needed a permit that had never existed in 20 years of living there. My horse pasture drainage was creating environmental concerns that no environmental agency had ever mentioned. Each citation came with Corinne's signature at the bottom, her handwriting sharp and vindictive. Each fine chipped away at my savings and my peace of mind. I started keeping a folder of all the paperwork, and by the end of March, it was 3 inches thick. The worst part was how she timed her visits. Corinne would show up during my morning chores, clipboard in hand, writing down violations while I was trying to feed my horses. She would arrive during dinner time, shining her flashlight around my property and taking pictures of things that had never been problems before. "Just doing my job, Tom," she would say with that cold smile whenever I asked what she was looking for. "Making sure everyone follows the same rules." But we both knew these were not the same rules everyone else followed. These were Corinne's rules, designed specifically to make my life miserable because I had refused to let her use my ranch for political gain. My lawyer, Jim Peterson, reviewed all the citations with the patience of a man who had seen this kind of thing before. He spread the papers across his desk and shook his head slowly. "Tom, this is harassment, plain and simple," Jim said. "But here is the problem. Every single one of these citations is technically legal. She is not breaking any laws, she is just interpreting them very creatively." "So I have no recourse?" I asked. "You can fight each citation individually, but that will cost you more in legal fees than just paying the fines, and it will not stop her from finding new things to cite you for." Jim leaned back in his chair. "The real question is, why is she doing this? What does she want?" I told him about the campaign event request and Corinne's reaction to my refusal. Jim nodded like a man who had heard this story before. "Political retaliation," he said. "Abuse of power, but proving it in court is almost impossible unless she does something really stupid." I left Jim's office feeling more trapped than when I had arrived. Corinne had found the perfect weapon against me, the law itself, twisted into a tool of personal revenge. Every morning brought new dread about what citation might be waiting for me, what new violation she had discovered in the peaceful life I had built. The worst part was watching my neighbors start to avoid me. Word was getting around that I was having trouble with the sheriff, and in a small town, that kind of trouble was contagious. People who had been coming to my ranch for years suddenly found excuses to stay away. My sanctuary was becoming a prison, one citation at a time. The morning Corinne came with her demands changed everything. It was early April, and I was fixing a section of fence that had been damaged in a spring storm. I heard the patrol cars before I saw them, 2 of them this time, their engines rumbling up my gravel drive like mechanical thunder. Corinne stepped out of the lead car wearing her full tactical gear, as if she was responding to an armed robbery instead of visiting a ranch. Deputy Martinez climbed out of the second car, and I could see the discomfort written all over his face. He knew this was wrong, but he was too scared of Corinne to speak up. "Tom, I need to conduct a comprehensive safety inspection of your property," Corinne announced, holding up an official-looking document. "There have been complaints about potential hazards that could affect public safety." I walked closer, still holding my fence pliers, and read the document she was waving around. It was filled with legal language and official stamps, but the bottom line was clear. Corinne was demanding access to every building, every vehicle, and every corner of my property. "This says you need a warrant for this kind of search," I said, pointing to the fine print at the bottom. Corinne's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Only if you refuse to cooperate voluntarily. but I am sure a good citizen like you wants to help us ensure everyone's safety." The way she said, voluntarily, made it clear that refusing was not really an option in her mind. This was the moment I had been dreading for weeks, the final showdown that had been building since I refused to host her campaign event. I looked at my ranch, my barn, my horses, my home, and something inside me finally snapped. I had spent weeks being pushed around, cited, harassed, and intimidated. I had watched my neighbors turn away from me because they were afraid of the same treatment. I had seen my peaceful life turned into a legal nightmare because I had dared to say no to Sheriff Karen Mitchell. "No," I said, the word coming out stronger than I expected. "You do not have a warrant and you do not have my permission. This is my property and you need to leave." Karen's face went dark with rage. For a moment, I thought she might actually draw her weapon. Deputy Martinez stepped forward, clearly concerned about how far his boss was willing to push this confrontation. "Tom, you are making a serious mistake," Karen said, her voice low and dangerous. "I am trying to be reasonable here. Do not force me to do this the hard way." "The hard way would require a warrant," I replied. "And if you had grounds for a warrant, you would have already gotten one." I turned and walked toward my front gate, fishing my keys out of my pocket. Karen followed, her boots crunching on my gravel like gunshots. When I reached the gate, I closed it firmly and snapped the padlock shut. The symbolism was not lost on either of us. That gate had been open for 37 years, welcoming neighbors and friends. Now it was closed, locked against the very person who was supposed to protect and serve. "This is not over, Tom," Karen said through the chain link. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Maybe," I replied, "but it is my life to make mistakes with. This is my property, and I am exercising my constitutional rights. If you do not like that, take it up with a judge." Deputy Martinez grabbed Karen's arm before she could respond, and I could see him whispering urgently in her ear. After a moment, they both walked back to their patrol cars. But before Karen got in, she turned and looked at my barn one more time. That look sent ice through my veins. It was not the look of a law enforcement officer who had been denied access to evidence. It was the look of someone planning revenge. As their cars disappeared down the county road, I stood behind my locked gate and realized what I had just done. I had drawn a line in the sand against someone who had the power to destroy me. I had challenged the authority of a person who was clearly willing to abuse that authority for personal gain. The war between Sheriff Karen Mitchell and me had officially begun, and I had just fired the first shot. 3 days later, they came at dawn. I was drinking coffee on my porch when I heard the rumble of heavy machinery coming down my road. Through the morning mist, I could see the convoy approaching. 2 patrol cars, a county truck, and behind them, a massive bulldozer on a trailer. My heart started pounding as I realized what was happening. Karen had found her way around my locked gate, and she was bringing the full weight of county authority with her. The convoy stopped just outside my property line, and Karen stepped out wearing a hard hat and safety vest over her uniform. She was carrying a clipboard thick with official documents, and her smile was the coldest thing I had ever seen. "Tom," she called through my gate, "I have an emergency demolition order for the structure on your property that poses an immediate danger to public safety." I ran to the gate, my coffee mug still in my hand. "What structure? What danger?" Karen held up the clipboard, and I could see it was covered with stamps and signatures from county officials I had never heard of. "Your barn has been determined to be structurally unsound and poses an immediate risk of collapse. We are here to remedy that situation." My barn, The barn I had built with my own hands. The barn that had stood solid through 37 years of storms and seasons. The barn that housed my horses and held 40 years of memories. "That is impossible," I said, my voice cracking. "That barn is solid as a rock. You know it is." "According to our structural engineer's report, the foundation is compromised and the roof supports are failing," Karen replied, waving the papers like they were gospel truth. "We cannot allow a public safety hazard to remain standing." I grabbed the gate with both hands, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to see that engineer's report. I want to see who signed off on this." Karen's smile widened. "All the documentation is properly filed with the county, but right now we have work to do. Stand back, Tom. This is happening whether you cooperate or not." The bulldozer was already being unloaded from its trailer. The operator, a man I did not recognize, avoided making eye contact with me as he climbed into the cab. Deputy Martinez stood next to his patrol car, staring at his boots like he wished he could disappear. "You cannot do this," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were wrong. Karen had found a way to do exactly what she wanted, and she had made it all look legal and official. "I can and I am," Karen replied. "You should have thought about this before you locked me out of your property, Tom. Actions have consequences." The bulldozer rumbled to life, its diesel engine drowning out any other sound. I watched in horror as it approached my gate, and I realized Karen was not going to let a locked gate stop her. She was going to drive right through it. The gate that had protected my property for decades lasted about 5 seconds against a bulldozer blade. Metal screamed and twisted as my fence was ripped apart like paper. The machine rolled onto my property, heading straight for my barn. "Stop!" I screamed, running alongside the bulldozer. "Please just stop for a minute." But the operator had his orders, and Karen was standing behind him with the authority of the county government backing her up. I was just one man with no legal power to stop what was happening. The first blow from the bulldozer blade punched through the barn wall like it was made of cardboard. 40 years of work, 40 years of memories, 40 years of my life disappeared in a cloud of dust and splintered wood. My horses scattered in terror as their shelter collapsed around them. Tools that had belonged to my father were buried under falling timbers. Photo albums and family mementos that I had stored in the barn were crushed under tons of debris. I stood there helplessly, tears streaming down my face, as my life's work was systematically destroyed. Karen watched the whole thing with satisfaction written across her face, finally getting the revenge she had been planning since the day I refused to host her campaign event. The demolition took 2 hours. When it was over, nothing remained of my barn except a pile of broken wood and twisted metal. 40 years of my life reduced to rubble because I had dared to exercise my constitutional rights. As the convoy prepared to leave, Karen walked over to where I stood in the wreckage of my dreams. "I hope you learned something today, Tom," she said. "Nobody tells me no, nobody." She climbed back into her patrol car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the ruins of everything I had built. That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the debris of my old life and made a decision that would change everything. If Karen thought destroying my barn would break me, she was about to learn how wrong she could be. I called Jim Peterson at home, not caring that it was past 10 o'clock. When he heard the story of what had happened, his lawyer's calm finally cracked. "Jesus Christ, Tom," he said. "She actually demolished your barn, without a real warrant or proper notice." "She had papers," I told him. "Official-looking documents with stamps and signatures." "Bring me everything you have," Jim said. "Every citation, every photograph, every piece of paper she ever gave you. And Tom, start documenting everything that happened today. Write down every detail you can remember because we are going to war." The next morning, I drove to Jim's office with 3 boxes of evidence that I had been collecting for weeks. But more importantly, I brought something Karen had not counted on: the security cameras I had installed around my property 6 months earlier to monitor my livestock. Jim's eyes lit up when I told him about the cameras. "Please tell me you got the demolition on video." "Every minute of it," I replied, "from the time they arrived until the time they left." We spent the next 4 hours reviewing the footage, and what we found was even better than I had hoped. The cameras had captured Karen's satisfied smile as she watched my barn fall. They had recorded her celebration with the other county workers. Most importantly, they had documented the complete absence of any real structural inspection before the demolition began. "This is gold, Tom," Jim said, pausing the video on a frame that showed Karen laughing while my horses fled in terror. "This shows clear malicious intent. She was not trying to protect public safety. She was trying to punish you." Jim made copies of everything and started reaching out to his network of legal contacts. Within days, he had connected me with Sarah Chen, a civil rights attorney from the state capitol who specialized in government abuse cases. Sarah drove down to Millfield on a Thursday afternoon and spent 3 hours walking through the wreckage of my barn. She took hundreds of photographs and measurements, building a case that would stand up in federal court. "What Sheriff Mitchell did here crosses several constitutional lines," Sarah explained as we stood in the ruins of my life's work. "Fourth Amendment violations, due process violations, and clear retaliation for exercising your First Amendment rights." Word was getting around town about what had happened at my ranch. The local newspaper, the Millfield Gazette, sent a reporter named Mike Wilson to interview me. When I showed him the security footage, his face went pale. "Sheriff Mitchell has been untouchable in this county for years," Mike said, "but this is different. This is evidence." The story ran on the front page the following week. "Sheriff destroys citizens' property in apparent retaliation." The article included still frames from my security cameras and quotes from neighbors who had witnessed Karen's harassment campaign. Within hours of the newspaper hitting the stands, my phone started ringing. Other people in Millfield County began calling to share their own stories about Sheriff Karen Mitchell. A restaurant owner told me about how Karen had shut down his business for 3 days over a permit that had never been required before. A farmer described how Karen had cited him for violations that did not exist in the county code. Each story followed the same pattern. Someone had crossed Karen or refused to do what she wanted, and then they had found themselves drowning in citations, inspections, and harassment. I was not her first victim. I was just the first one with security cameras and the determination to fight back. Sarah started building what she called a pattern and practice case, showing that Karen's abuse of power was not a one-time incident, but a systematic campaign against anyone who challenged her authority. "We are not just fighting for your barn anymore, Tom," Sarah told me during one of our strategy meetings. "We are fighting for every person in this county who has been too scared to stand up to her." The case was growing bigger than I had ever imagined. What had started as a personal dispute over a campaign event was becoming a federal civil rights lawsuit that could change how law enforcement operated in rural counties across the country. Karen had thought she could destroy my barn and intimidate me into silence. Instead, she had given me the evidence I needed to destroy her career, and expose the corruption that had been hiding behind her badge for years. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The Millfield County Town Hall meeting on May 15th was standing room only. Word had spread through the community that I was going to present evidence of Sheriff Mitchell's abuse of power, and people came from 3 counties away to witness what everyone knew would be a reckoning. I arrived early with Sarah Chen and Jim Peterson, carrying boxes of evidence that we had spent weeks organizing. The local television station from the county seat had sent a camera crew, and I could see reporters from newspapers I had never heard of setting up in the back of the room. Karen arrived 15 minutes before the meeting started, flanked by Deputy Martinez and 2 other officers I did not recognize. She was wearing her dress uniform with every medal and ribbon she had ever earned, trying to project authority and respectability. But I could see the tension in her face when she looked at the crowd that had gathered. County Commissioner Walsh called the meeting to order and immediately recognized me to speak. My hands were shaking as I stood up and walked to the podium, but my voice was steady when I began. My name is Tom Bradley, and I have lived in Millfield County for 37 years, I said. 3 weeks ago, Sheriff Karen Mitchell destroyed my barn in what she claimed was an emergency safety demolition. Tonight, I want to show you what really happened. Sarah set up a laptop connected to a projection screen, and the room fell silent as the security footage began to play. You could hear people gasp when Karen's satisfied smile appeared on the big screen, watching my life's work crumble into dust. This was not about public safety, I said as the video showed Karen celebrating with her crew. This was about punishment. This was about what happens when you dare to tell Sheriff Mitchell no. The room erupted in murmurs and whispers as people recognized the woman they had elected to protect them. But I was not finished. This pattern of harassment and retaliation has been going on for years, I continued. Sheriff Mitchell has been using her badge as a weapon against anyone who challenges her authority. One by one, other victims came forward to speak. Bill Henderson, the restaurant owner, described how Karen had shut down his business during the busy tourist season over a permit that had never existed. Mary Santos, a single mother, told the crowd how Karen had threatened to take her children away after Mary filed a complaint about excessive traffic stops. Each story painted the same picture. Sheriff Karen Mitchell had turned the Millfield County Sheriff's Department into her personal army, using the law as a weapon against her political enemies and personal grievances. Karen sat in the front row, her face growing redder with each testimony. Finally, she could not take it anymore. She jumped to her feet and demanded to speak. "These are all lies," she shouted, her composure finally cracking completely. "I have served this county faithfully for 12 years, and I will not sit here and let these troublemakers destroy my reputation with their fabricated stories." Commissioner Walsh tried to restore order, but Karen was not finished. She pointed directly at me, her finger shaking with rage. "Tom Bradley is a convicted felon who has been harboring dangerous criminals on his property," she declared. "That barn was destroyed because it was being used for illegal activities that threatened our entire community." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen had just committed perjury in front of 200 witnesses and 3 television cameras. I had never been convicted of any crime, and she knew it. But more importantly, she had just proven everything we had been saying about her willingness to abuse her power. Sarah stood up and addressed the crowd. "Sheriff Mitchell just made a serious accusation against my client. I challenge her to produce any evidence of Mr. Bradley's alleged criminal record or any illegal activities on his property." Corinne's face went white as she realized what she had just done. She looked around the room like a trapped animal, seeing nothing but hostile faces staring back at her. Even her own deputies were shaking their heads in disbelief. "The truth is," Sarah continued, "Sheriff Mitchell has been systematically abusing her authority for years, and when citizens like Tom Bradley dare to exercise their constitutional rights, she retaliates with the full weight of county government behind her." The local news coverage that night was devastating for Corinne. The footage of her lies at the town hall meeting was broadcast across 3 states, and by morning, it had gone viral on social media. The woman who had built her political career on law and order was exposed as exactly the kind of corrupt official that voters despised. Her campaign for county commissioner collapsed overnight as supporters distanced themselves and donors demanded their money back. But more importantly, the state attorney general's office announced they were opening a formal investigation into her conduct. Corinne Mitchell's reign of terror in Millfield County was finally over. 6 months after my barn was destroyed, I stood in the same spot watching a new structure rise from the ruins. The insurance settlement from the county had been generous, but more importantly, the federal civil rights lawsuit had resulted in a judgment that would ensure nothing like this could ever happen again. The FBI investigation that followed the town hall meeting uncovered a pattern of corruption that went far beyond what anyone had imagined. Corinne had been taking bribes from local businesses in exchange for selective enforcement. She had been falsifying reports to cover up the criminal activities of her political allies. Most shocking of all, she had been stealing money from the department's evidence locker for years. The federal charges were filed in August: conspiracy, civil rights violations, embezzlement, perjury, and abuse of power under color of law. Corinne's trial lasted 3 weeks, and I testified on the second day about the destruction of my barn and the harassment campaign that preceded it. Sitting in that federal courtroom, looking at Corinne in her orange jumpsuit instead of her sheriff's uniform, I felt something I had not experienced in months: peace. The woman who had terrorized our county with her badge and gun was finally being held accountable by people she could not intimidate or threaten. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Corinne was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all her victims. The judge's words at sentencing still ring in my ears: "You betrayed the trust of every citizen you swore to protect, and you turned the law into a weapon of personal revenge." That betrayal strikes at the very heart of our justice system. The county appointed an interim sheriff while they searched for Corinne's replacement, and the difference was immediate. The harassment stopped. The bogus citations disappeared. People stopped being afraid to exercise their constitutional rights. My new barn was finished in October, bigger and better than the one Corinne had destroyed. The community came together for a barn-raising party that lasted all weekend, with neighbors bringing food and lending hands just like in the old days. But this time, it meant more than just helping a neighbor. It was a celebration of justice and a declaration that corruption would not be tolerated in Millfield County. Deputy Martinez, who had been forced to participate in Corinne's harassment campaign, came by during the barn raising to apologize. He told me he had wanted to speak up earlier, but was afraid of losing his job and his family's health insurance. "I should have done the right thing sooner," he said, shaking my hand. "What she did to you was wrong, and I am sorry I did not have the courage to stop her." I accepted his apology because I understood the position Corinne had put him in. She had created a culture of fear that affected everyone around her, even the good cops who wanted to do their jobs honestly. The new sheriff, elected in a special election that fall, implemented new policies to prevent the kind of abuse that Karen had made routine. Body cameras for all interactions, civilian oversight of citations, and a citizen complaint process that could not be buried or ignored. As I write this story, my ranch is once again the peaceful sanctuary it was always meant to be. My gates are open to friends and neighbors. My barn is full of hay and hope. My horses graze in pastures that are no longer shadowed by fear. Karen Mitchell thought she could use her badge to destroy anyone who dared to tell her no. Instead, she destroyed herself and gave our community the chance to build something better from the ruins of her corruption. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it finally arrives, it is worth the wait. The moral of this story is simple. No one, not even those who wear badges and carry guns, is above the law. And sometimes the only way to defend justice is to stand up to those who would abuse it.